what was life like in the late Roman Empire? Dr. Philip Travis here from Sicily at a well-preserved Roman villa found in the central area of modern Sicily. This villa is incredibly well preserved. In many ways, it might even be more impressive to look at than Roman Pompeii. The floor mosaics are incredible. In this video, I'm going to walk you through some of the historical depictions within this Roman villa and help to explain to you what life was like in the late Roman Empire and what Roman life was like for individuals, but also how they affected those around them, including animals and the environment. The Roman Villa of Casale. This is, as I mentioned in the opening, this is located in Sicily. It's sort of south central Sicily, to the southwest of Catania. On a really clear day, actually, the volcano of Mount Etna would be visible from certain viewing areas. This Roman villa is a really, really fascinating and impressive archaeological site. The villa was buried in a mudslide, and this preserved tremendously well the mosaics on the floor in the villa. And most of that excavation occurred in the 20th century, so it's very much opened the door to a much greater sort of understanding into life, certainly life for the wealthy, the aristocracy in the late Roman period. And here we're looking at sort of the entrance of this villa. Up here, you see the columns in the main courtyard here, and over here, this is the remnants of the villa's aqueduct, which, of course, the aqueducts were used all over Rome, equally, if not more impressive, than the Roman road system. The aqueducts integral for moving water to places, so that a place like this could have baths and clean water. This is located near the town of Piazza Armernia, which is in Sicily, and that's the sort of existent sort of major town that you go through on your way to this site. This is the central court, and I'm going to show most of the pictures that I'm going to show now are going to be from the interior, and I want to talk about some of the mosaics. And I can't show us all of the mosaics, but I'm going to show us some of the ones that I think are the most interesting and most impressive in terms of their preservations. There's some debate as to when this was built, who it was built for. Most would believe it was probably an imperial palace for probably the Emperor Maximian. There's actually a mosaic depiction of Maximian himself, as well as Maximian's wife and their children, which I will show you in this slideshow. Maximian was one of the 4 emperors. So in the later Roman period, we're talking about the 3rd century CE, so the 200s. Under the leadership of Diocletian, the Roman Empire became very, very large. And so as a result of that, the Roman emperors divided the empire up into 4 administrative districts. So there was sort of an emperor for each sort of regional section of the empire. And of course, that ultimately, kind of sets up the administrative basis for the Byzantine period, which ultimately was known as the Eastern Roman Empire, centered in the city of Constantinople, which is today Istanbul. Maximian, this palace in Sicily, was likely for Maximian, who was one of those 4 emperors following the reforms of Diocletian. The images you're going to see here are mosaics. Mosaics are small colored tiles that are all put together by hand to create imagery. And here, of course, you see these mosaics here depicting various animals. There's going to be other depictions like this I will show you. And quite interestingly here, this is the vestibule of the domina, the vestibule of the lady of the house. And here you see the lady of the house, presumably Maximian. Presumably this was Maximian's home for at least a time. And this was his wife. And his wife is here with his two daughters and their servants, presumably going to the bathhouse. Now, these are mosaics of the room of the small game hunt. And you can see in these depictions here, you can see the various hunting. They're using hunting dogs to hunt smaller game. Here you see them moving the game, and down here enjoying the food that they have killed, that they have captured and killed. This was actually, so the late Roman period, and even before that really, Sicily, the island of Sicily became a location that was really the centerpiece of the so-called latifundia system, which is these large plantation estates that really began to come into existence following the Roman victories in the long-term and for both sides devastating wars known as the Punic Wars with Carthage. The Punic Wars led to really a loss of a lot of land for smaller farmers who then moved to cities, and the land was largely purchased and taken under the control of large landowners, and a lot of that happened on the island of Sicily. So this villa likely would have some way, shape, or form played a role in the greater latifundia system. The slave plantation system really is what it was for the Romans. And prior to the late imperial period, there were actually two very long and significant slave wars fought on the island of Sicily, and undoubtedly some of that fighting would have occurred not far from this location, albeit this villa as it exists in these images likely did not exist at that time. So the small game hunts, here you see again depictions of Romans engaging in hunting in the imperial period. So look into this type of life during this time period. This is the basilica, and I'll show you images just in where you're looking from effectively into this basilica is a large hallway, and on the hallway there are the mosaics of the so-called big game hunt. And they're quite fascinating and quite elaborate to look at, and I'll show you some of those. The basilica in a villa like this or in a town, a basilica was really the central court. It was where an emperor or an aristocrat would have done significant business. These were often places where justice was vetted out, and so this would have been the central hall, if you will, of this villa. This large sort of palace complex, the basilica. Now here you see, and this is just adjacent to, this is the hallway. This is one look. It's a very long hallway, so it's not possible to really photograph the entire thing in one shot. So I'm going to show you a couple of different angles of this and talk a little bit about the mosaics that you're seeing here. So this hallway is just adjacent, perpendicular to that entrance to the basilica. And on this long hallway, we see elaborate mosaics depicting what's sometimes termed the big game hunt, but they're also actually depicting the sort of shipping industry of the Romans. You can see Romans capturing animals, exotic animals. You can see them moving these animals onto ships. These animals, as you look down the corridor this way, those animals would be, in many cases, taken into Roman gladiatorial games. And, of course, the games that would have occurred not only in Rome, but, of course, there were those types of events all over Rome, were quite brutal and oftentimes climaxed in gladiatorial, human-on-human combat to the death, but oftentimes, too, involved the slaughter of many, many, many wild animals. The Romans actually themselves caused the extinction of a number of large mammals themselves, and there were gladiatorial games in some cases that resulted in the massacre of thousands of wild animals, many of which were then fed to the population that were witnessing in this entertainment. These were events; those gladiatorial games were events to sort of appease the populations. This is the other look down this this hallway. I'm going to show you some more images of the mosaics here momentarily. You can see how the floor is dipping like this. This is a consequence of the landslide that had covered this this place. And again, this is the corridor just adjacent to the perpendicular to the basilica, that large room. And again, this mosaics on the floor depict a myriad of elaborate hunting and likewise shipping. And here you see, of course, Romans in these mosaics on board ships. You see them capturing large wild beasts, forcing them onto these vessels. An elephant here, and of course, many of these animals would have been slaughtered and eaten. Many more would have been taken and slaughtered in the gladiatorial games. You see a myriad of different animals, tigers, lions, rhinos, and so forth in these depictions. Here again, another look at this close-up of the elephant being pulled onto the ship, the lion or the tiger up here as part of a look into the Mediterranean sort of shipping industry of the Romans, and also the Romans' impact and effect on animals and the environment. As of course we know, following the end of the Punic Wars and the rise of Augustus Caesar, following the civil wars that resulted in the assassination of Julius Caesar, we of course know that this was a period usually referred to as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. Now this would have come probably after, this would have been built after the formal ending of what's regarded as the Pax Romana following the death of Marcus Aurelius, but nonetheless still a period of time where Roman influence in the Mediterranean would have been very, very significant. The Pax Romana oftentimes refers to the sort of control and power and influence that Rome had on the people's populations, the animals, and the trade routes surrounding the Mediterranean Sea. Another look at these mosaics. Here you see again Romans, Roman ship. You can see these various animals, large animals that are being captured and hunted. And even here you see this depiction right here. I'll give you a close-up of that. This is Maximian. This is the emperor with his bodyguards depicted in this mosaic. So you can see the actual sort of owner of this house right there, likely owner at least, one of those four emperors following the reforms of Emperor Diocletian. This is the doorway into what some regard as the most interesting room in the house. So this is the doorway into what is sometimes referred to as the bikini room, or the room with the girls in bikini. And that's because the women obviously are dressed in outfits that resemble the modern bikini. This is actually a depiction of athletes competing in the discus and other various athletic competitions and being awarded in these athletic competitions. It's a sort of vivid depiction of athleticism in the Roman period. And now another interesting thing about this is you can see here where the floor has been damaged. This is actually an overlay, and it was probably overlaid maybe in the 4th century. So the floor did not originally contain this. It was originally a different design pattern, and it's been mosaic over with what has become arguably the most iconic of the mosaic depictions at this site, and certainly in all of the remnants of Roman antiquity that one can witness with their eyes today. The room with the girls in bikini, a depiction of women in athletic competition. Here's another very interesting slide. This is a slide that depicts Greco-Roman myths. Over here is the myth of Polyphemus. And for those of you that are familiar with the writings of Homer, the Odyssey, of course, Polyphemus was the Cyclops, and this is depicting Ulysses with the Cyclops in Homer's epic poem. Interesting thing about this, in this case, the Cyclops has 3 eyes, as opposed to the typical 1 eye that you would think with Polyphemus the Cyclops. But in this depiction, Polyphemus actually has 3 eyes, and scholars have perplexed over why that might be. Over here is the myth of Pan, another sort of Greco-Roman mythological narrative, depicted again in these mosaics on the tiled mosaic floors of this Roman villa. This is a semicircular atrium, and I selected this image in part because of the depictions of the fish and the ships, and of course the structures and trees that you see back here, which makes the image just very interesting to look at as we imagine what the world was like in the Roman period. This is also one of the more well-known of the rooms in the Roman Villa of Casale. This is sometimes referred to, and by the way, these titles are not titles that I'm making up, the names-wise. These are typically the titles that you'll find when you visit this site. These are what they're called. This is called the Cubicle with Erotic Scene. And what this room would have been, undoubtedly, would have been the room where the master of the house, where the head of the house, the emperor, Maximian, presuming that this is, in fact, one of Maximian's homes, this would have been the room where that individual would have taken their numerous concubines into their bed chambers. And so you can see here depictions of mosaics on the floor, and of course this central mosaic here depicting an embrace of two individuals in this room.